Have you ever heard of a case where a child disappears from inside his own home, and there's no clear explanation for how it happened? No broken windows, no forced entry, no noise in the middle of the night. Just a quiet house, and by morning, a child is gone. Because that's exactly what happened in Hendersonville, Tennessee. And what makes this case even more disturbing isn't just the disappearance itself. It's everything that doesn't make sense afterward. The missing timeline, the lack of evidence, the questions that continue to grow the deeper you look. This is the story of Sebastian Rogers, a 15-year-old boy who vanished without a trace, and a mystery that remains unsolved. Hendersonville is the kind of place where people expect life to feel safe. It sits just outside Nashville, close enough to the city for convenience, but quiet enough to feel removed from danger. Families live here for that reason: stability, routine, predictability. And Sebastian Rogers was part of that world. He was 15 years old, still figuring out who he was, still growing, still learning. But like many teenagers, he had his own personality, one shaped by the way he experienced the world. Sebastian was on the autism spectrum. That meant routine mattered to him. Familiar surroundings mattered. Consistency mattered. People close to him said he preferred structure. He wasn't impulsive. He wasn't the type to suddenly leave without explanation. That detail would become one of the most important parts of this case. Because if Sebastian depended on routine, then why would he break it so suddenly? The night he disappeared didn't begin with chaos. There were no loud arguments reported. No emergency calls. Nothing that suggested danger was about to enter that home. Everything appeared normal. He was at home with his family. At some point, he went to bed. And sometime during the night, something changed. By the time morning came, Sebastian was gone. At first, the situation may have felt confusing more than alarming. Maybe he moved to another room? Maybe he stepped outside briefly. But very quickly, that confusion turned into panic. A full search of the house was conducted. Every room checked. Closets, bathrooms, spaces where a child might hide or rest. Nothing. He wasn't there. And what made it worse, there were no clear signs explaining how he left. When authorities were contacted, the urgency of the situation became immediately clear. A missing teenager is serious. A missing teenager with vulnerabilities is critical. Search teams were organized almost immediately. Law enforcement began canvassing the neighborhood, going door to door, asking residents if they had seen anything unusual during the night. Surveillance cameras from nearby homes were collected and reviewed. But right away, investigators encountered something deeply troubling. There was no clear evidence of movement, no confirmed footage showing Sebastian leaving the home, no obvious direction for where he could have gone. In most missing person cases, investigators start building a timeline almost immediately. A last sighting, a direction of travel, a clue that begins to form a path. But in this case, there was almost nothing to build from. Search efforts expanded quickly. Volunteers joined the effort, walking through nearby areas, calling out Sebastian's name, hoping for any response. K-9 units were brought in to track scent. Drones scanned wooded areas and open land. Every possible location was considered, but as hours turned into days, the situation became more concerning, because despite all the effort, there were no answers. And when a case reaches that point, when there's no evidence, no confirmed sightings, no clear timeline, questions begin to shift. Not just where is he, but what actually happened? Investigators began focusing more closely on the timeline inside the home. Who was awake? Who last saw Sebastian? What time was he confirmed to be in his room? These are standard questions in any investigation. But here, they carried extra weight. Because the lack of external evidence meant the answers might be inside the house itself. At the same time, the case began gaining attention online. And with attention came speculation. People began analyzing every available detail, trying to piece together possibilities, trying to make sense of what didn't add up. Some believed Sebastian may have left the house on his own, perhaps confused, perhaps following a routine or impulse that didn't fully make sense. But that theory raised its own problems. If he left on his own, why wasn't he seen? Why didn't any cameras capture him? Why hasn't there been a confirmed sighting? Others began to consider more serious possibilities. Could someone have taken him? Was there an encounter that hasn't been discovered? But again, there was no clear evidence supporting that either. This is what makes the case so difficult. Every possibility leads to another question. Every theory lacks confirmation, and the absence of evidence becomes the biggest obstacle. Meanwhile, the search continued. Law enforcement followed every tip that came in. Possible sightings were investigated. Reports from nearby areas were checked, but each lead ended the same way. No confirmation, no breakthrough. For Sebastian's family, the emotional toll became overwhelming. Not knowing where he was, not knowing if he was safe, not knowing what had happened. That kind of uncertainty is something most people can't fully understand unless they experience it. Because it doesn't end. It doesn't resolve. It just continues. Every day, there's a unique kind of pain in missing person cases. Because unlike loss, there is no closure. There's only waiting. Waiting for a phone call. Waiting for news. Waiting for something, anything that brings answers. Investigators have remained cautious in how they describe the case. They have not confirmed foul play, but they also have not ruled it out. That leaves the case in a difficult position. Open, but unresolved. And as time passes, the challenge only grows. Memories fade. Evidence becomes harder to recover. Opportunities for discovery become more limited. But hope doesn't disappear. Because in cases like this, all it takes is one piece of information, one detail, one person remembering something they thought didn't matter. Somewhere, there is an answer. Somewhere, there is a moment that explains what happened. And until that moment is found, this case remains open. Today, Sebastian Rogers is still missing. His case is still active. Investigators continue to encourage anyone with information to come forward, because even the smallest detail could change everything. And that's what makes this case so haunting. Not just the disappearance, but the silence that followed. A normal home, a normal night, a boy who depended on routine, and a mystery that still hasn't been solved. Because at the center of all of this is not just a case file. It's a person, a 15-year-old boy, a life that should have continued forward, a future that suddenly stopped. And the question that remains is one that still hasn't been answered. What really happened to Sebastian Rogers? If you want more real unsolved cases like this, stories that deserve attention, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss future videos. Leave a comment below with your thoughts or theories. Sometimes a different perspective can bring attention to something others missed. And if this story stayed with you, consider liking the video so more people can see it. Because in cases like this, awareness matters. And sometimes, awareness is the only thing that leads to answers.